Dear Commodoremania channel friends, good evening everyone, here we are. So tonight we are going to talk about something first of all, something that is related to the latest Commodore home production. What is the latest Commodore product? We all know that it is the Amiga CD32. The Amiga CD32, the world's first 32-bit console, was launched in July 1993 after a rather short gestation because Commodore was looking for a product that could save it. Basically, the engineering team was rather discouraged with respect to the possibility of saving the company, but they were trying to put together a product that could be the calling card for a new acquisition, for a company that could take over Commodore in its entirety and relaunch it on the market. In fact, by the time the 32 CD was conceived, there was only a team of about 60 people left in Commodore, so the engineering team was down to the bone, and the production of this object was in great doubt with great difficulties. Here is where Poldo also wants to join in the description of this product, which is not the Amiga CD32 but something different. So the Amiga CD32 was born as a game console and on the chipset of the Amiga 1200, actually however with a processor that controlled the CD-ROM reader 2-per that was added to the Marissima console, and that was in charge of managing the graphics chunky to planar and vice versa. That is a graphics that could be similar to that of the emerging VGA on PC. To mean and to simplify a lot, the chipset was AGA, the kickstart and evolution of the 3.1 suitable to manage the CUD-ROM reader integrated in the equipment. It was in fact a console, so it had no keyboard and no floppy, rather all media was read from CD-ROM. The CD32, as we all know, had production difficulties since Convenient no longer having the economic strength to pay to settle contracts with suppliers of hardware. Parts had to buy the parts, paying them directly on arrival, therefore without the possibility of a directed payment but with a payment directly on delivery. This is a big disadvantage because especially for a company with little liquidity, paying directly for the parts meant necessarily having to invest that little liquidity in the purchase of the parts without making money from sales. In addition, Commodore, being in a bad light with respect to the suppliers, was not able to get lower prices for the chipset companions, but had to shell out a great deal of money here. Then this is the whole series of reasons that contributed to the already imminent bankruptcy of the company. But let's go back a little bit. Let's rewind the tape and go back to July 1903. This console was assembled mainly in the Philippine factory and brought to market with a presentation made at the Science Museum in London on July 16,990, and it sold 100,000 pieces for the time it was on the market, and most of the games unfortunately were conversions for Friend CD32, but little use is made of the greater graphics capability and greater capacity of the CD-ROM as a physical medium, and so in fact these are the reasons also for the relative success. And yet here it is that at some point Commodore goes out of business. New companies take over who want to acquire it. As we all know, ESCOM was the company that will acquire it, because I make this digression. And I talk about ESCOM because simply ESCOM continued to produce the Friend 1200 close relative from the chipset point of view of the Friend CD32 and the Friend 4000 Tower. And although this is another story implicated with the object here that is in this box, because the lifeblood, albeit temporary, brought by ESCOM induced third parties to produce accessories also for Friend CD30. 2. The idea was to expand it to make it more like a friend. 1200 with an integrated CD-ROM reader, expand the memory and expand the storage capacity and the ability to store data by adding a hard disk as well. Probably many of you have already figured out where the direction, where the talk goes, and in this box we have just something that is related to the Friend CD32, to its expandability. So here we open the box and we see, first of all, in this little envelope, board, 3-connector board. This 3-connector board, which are the back connectors of Friend CD32, which have all the signals of the console, including video signals, the system bus and whatnot. And this is indicative of the object that inside this box. Here occurs the very rare LSAT CD32 Pro module. This marvel was produced for a limited time in 1995. Here we link back to the ESCOM talk because 1995, still third-party companies, believed in the relaunch of convenience and therefore also in the possible relaunch of the Friend CD32. This expansion module made it possible to actually transform the Mica CD32 into a Mica 1200 enhanced at the rear. We can see the switch on off of the internal memory that could go up to 8 megabytes. The external video output port, a port for an external floppy and a port for a power supply that had the same characteristics, the same form factor of the power supply for Amica 500, for Amica 600 and for Amica 1200. All remember that. Instead, the power supply for Amica CD32 that you can continue to use even with this expansion had a round connector, therefore substantially different from this square one of other Amica models. So here we can use the power supplies from other Amica models to directly power the CD32. The CD32 Pro module then allowed for the addition of a floppy disk drive, which however for the time still turned out to be convenient in an era when most of the programs were still on the floppy disk. Let's go however to poke around inside this item. Many will cringe, he says, but how do you open it? On the other hand, these objects must be observed inside as well, because otherwise much of the poetry and curiosity associated with the objects themselves is lost. I forgot, now that I'm unscrewing sideways, this object also allowed to place a keyboard. AT, a standard PCBM keyboard, had a serial port and a parallel port. So in fact a real computer. Then let's also go to remove the additional 2 side screws. Fortunately a module easily accessible inside is made of black dot metal, quite sturdy. Here we go to lift the metal, and here it is. Shows itself in all its glory. We have modern add-ons because clearly expand with a hard drive. Ide de 40 pin. This item doesn't make much sense. In the 2000 Ventidus we have a CF card crib and we also have a modern buffer battery from a well-known international brand. And we have the Motorola 68882 math coprocessor installed. This allowed for floating point calculations. And then we also have a memory module here. You can see an 8 megabyte memory module installed on the side. Very useful. A floppy disk drive. Alpes Electric. Here it is. And if I turn this board over, this is the thing that I'm not going to do, because actually turning it over means disassembling it further and maybe damaging the fragile circuitry. We definitely have two 85C controllers like the ones present in the more evolved Amiga, in the Amiga 3000, in the Amiga 4000, and so basically we have circuitry that is reminiscent of Commodore's own. On the other hand, for the compatibility of these add-ons with the internal circuitry of the Amiga CD, it is essential to also employ CSG production parts. As you may recall, Commodore had acquired back in the early 80s Commodore Semico, the most electronics, by turning it into Commodore Semiconductor Group, so a subsidiary that produced integrated on behalf of Commodore. So they were directly making some integrated in-house and Commodore. It is very interesting, the talk about the CD32 related to full motion video, an expansion, a scale of expansion that allowed the decode Mac and PEG, and that the use of the CD32 Pro module of a Polish company that produced this module could be continued, i.e. one could continue in the use of this module. The full motion video module could be added to this configuration of Amiga CD32. Since an expansion comb remained free, one comb was connected, the rear one of Amiga CD32. Another, the module in the SAT, and the middle one resulted free to add further expansion cards, and in the fax, especially at the time, it was designed to add the full motion video card that, precisely as I said, allows the decoding of movies in format, in rare objects, certainly, since it was sold in very few copies, and on the other hand, unfortunately linked to the descending parabola of the CD32 Amiga and the bankruptcy of Commodore. So the relaunch of the CD32 by ESCOM, there was not Interenio. ESCOM lasted a short time, and just enough time to produce a few thousand, 200 Amiga 1000 and about 1,000, 4,000 tower Amiga in the United States. And then all the events of the change of hands of the brand that we know well even today, still passionate us Commodorians to understand how it will end. Dear greetings to all. I hope you enjoyed the video and especially appreciate Commodore Magna channel.